A storm of blood approaches fast, hell's open, heavens weep, for no one's soul doth lie beyond the measure of his reach. Girabanya is a land sundered and forged by catastrophe, its peoples born from blood. It was necessity, not fortune, that saw the rugged and relatively barren peaks and highlands of the eastern edge of Ablathia's spine first populated at the dusk of the Fifth Astral Era, and the fiery token of the Lord of Destruction himself, which first led them here. As a dark storm of blood encroaches on our eastern horizons, we are today going to take the opportunity to examine up to the present day the history of this land and of its great nation Ala Mhigo, all the better to light a fire underneath our brave adventurers and stir within them a solidarity for their soon-to-be brothers in arms and the lost home for which they yearn, a home which might yet be redeemed by the long-estranged Eorzean alliance and its stalwart champion, the Warrior of Light. After centuries of ceaseless war, the Battle of Amdapor finally tipped the realm's elemental balance, breaking the back of the Fifth Astral Era and precipitating the beginning of ceaseless rain and calamitous flood. Whilst the survivors of Nim launched their Operation Maelstrom, and the most privileged of Mark prepared the doomed flight of their Void Ark, most everyone else of Central Eorzea were forced to evacuate on foot, scrambling north up the treacherous foothills of Ablathia's spine. Some were rescued by the expedition of the foreign astrologian Neon Krepfson and joined his odyssey back to the Northern Empty, and countless more perished, but a number of refugees spied a great burning comet streaking across the night sky, and in their desperation interpreted it as a sign from the divine Rhalgr, Master of Destruction. They followed its trail deeper and higher across hostile mountain peaks, to its presumed point of impact in Girabanya, and here settled in the harsh, promised lands of Rhalgr, splintering into various tribes and clans which would spend the next several centuries squabbling over the region's paltry resources. The infertility of Girabanya also evidently had a great influence on local philosophy. Remembering and cherishing the salvation to which he had delivered them, the faithful of Rhalgr seem to have taken this harsh land as an opportunity to redeem and empower themselves, hardening their minds and bodies so that they might draw closer to him. From their training and meditation, these monks devised a method of tapping and channeling their bodily ether, and subsequently developed a devastating martial art. They formed a sacred and powerful order known, aptly, as the Fist of Rhalgr. Another group, as yet quite mysterious to us, was formed from the most unlikely of bedfellows in this region. The few surviving black and white mages from Mark and Amdapor found themselves the subject of persecution and manhunts across the realm, as their abuse of magic was widely considered the cause of the strife which had decimated the realm. So they banded together in an isolated corner of Girabanya, and once their descendants re-emerged on the realm's stage, they developed the curious hybrid discipline of red magic. This discipline did not, however, seem to have very much of an impact on the city-state of Ala Mhigo when compared to the cult of Rhalgr, but I'm sure that Stormblood will shed some light on its influence, and red magic will of course be the subject of a future video. It seems that some kind of natural selection imposed by the brutality of the region and constant struggle for survival saw the Hyur in particular, which settled in Girabanya, evolve into what we know today as the Highlander clan. It's possible that there was also some mixing between the Hyur and the Hellsguard Rogadan natives of Ablathia's spine, but that is pure conjecture. Whatever the cause, physical prowess is undisputed king in an era purged of mages, and so the superior fortitude of the Highlander clan allowed them to flourish, and after a millennium of constant territorial wars and skirmishes, in the 12th century of the 6th Astral Era, the stars aligned and gifted the Highlanders with a tactical genius to complement their natural martial strength. The man's name was Arnshelm Cotta, and as a kind of Girabanyan Genghis Khan, he quickly dominated and subjugated all of the region's disparate clans, even as they rallied to stand against him. Cotta was not satisfied with mere unification, however. Recognizing the unique geography of Girabanya as a passageway between Eorzea and both the Near East and the increasingly restless northern states of Ilzabad, he decided to build a proverbial gate, immediately beginning the construction of an immense fortress city on the edge of a lake upon the eastern border of the region. This was the birth of Ala Mhigo, and it makes sense of the state maxim, born from blood. As Cotter had predicted, Ala Mhigo was soon met with marauding armies from the north, and although they broke impotently against the walls of the great citadel, this nation born from blood continued perpetually submerged in viscous crimson, and the mountainous region of Girabanya remained mostly infertile. Ala Mhigo stemmed the potential of further migratory waves of Hyur into Eorzea, and the relative peace which allowed the southern Eorzean city-states to flourish is largely attributable to Ala Mhigo's defense of the realm's only land border. When the Eorzeans did squabble, it was only natural that they so often called upon Ala Mhigan mercenaries for their martial reputation, and so blood also flowed as the state's primary export. A good example of this was the use of Ala Mhigan sellswords in the besiegement and eventual destruction of Sildir by their Uldan brothers and sisters. More significantly, Ala Mhigo erected a series of watchtowers and garrisons in order to establish a safe corridor from the Eorzean border to the Near East. When Eorzean merchants began to reach east for trade opportunities, they enjoyed the safety of the Ala Mhigan routes and protection, and in return, Ala Mhigo quickly grew rich on tolls and taxation. The security and martial services provided by Ala Mhigo, however, proved their own undoing. Their neighbors stabilized and prospered, and Uldar in particular, having removed the Thorn of Sildir from its side, looked for ways to circumvent Ala Mhigo's cut from their profits. Uldar commissioned a Laminson-built fleet and took to the sea, sailing into Thavnir directly, carrying far more merchandise than a caravan train ever could, and without the steep tariffs imposed by those barbarian highlanders. As this route became more popular, Ala Mhigo's monopoly on import and export dissolved. Without any further sustainable industry, they would never recover. Girabanya lacks the endless mineral deposits of Thanalan, the vast grasslands of Kurthus, and has nary a trace of the game and fruit of the Twelveswood, nor the rich volcanic soil of Vilbrand. Ala Mhigo had been offered but a taste of a prosperous life and golden age before it was stolen from them, and the southern states were not going to share their comparative renaissance with their Highlander cousins. They continued to offer their mercenary services with no other recourse, but their resentment evidently simmered alongside their nation's decline over the next 2 centuries. It was only a matter of time before a strong and ambitious leader would emerge and lead Ala Mhigo to the only natural conclusion. His name was King Manfred, and he had a vision that had somehow never yet occurred to the kings of the blood-born and battle-hardened Highlanders. Perhaps he was consumed by the festering pride wound made by the indebted Eorzeans against his bulwark nation that had so long defended the realm from invasion. Perhaps he was driven to desperation by the misery of his people and simply sought some fertile land to till. If Manfred's true motivation was recorded, it has been lost to us, no doubt locked away in an imperial archive. Whether the gamble was noble or simply vindictive, in the year 1468 of the 6th Astral Era, some century now past, an Ala Mhigan invasion force mounted on Griffinback was dispatched westward, crossing the Veladina River a handful of miles from Gridania, and claimed sovereignty to the East Shroud, led by a legendary general and lifelong disciple of the Fist of Rhalgr named Gilbard. On the western side of the river, at fine sand banks, the foot of an extinct volcano standing above the Rothlet Sound, they were met by the Wood Whalers and God's Quiver both, led by newly appointed Gridanian Supreme Commander and Champion Lancer Vane Shalon Whitewater. After a long stalemate, Commander Whitewater ordered the Gridanian forces to retreat west to a defensible position at 9 Ivies, hoping to lure the Ala Mhigans into the cover of the Twelveswood where the Gridanians could press the advantage. In a bizarre twist, Whitewater fell rapidly ill and died in camp at 9 Ivies before his strategy could bear fruit, and his replacement, Commander Osborne, abandoned the plan, rushing back towards Fine Sand. They were ambushed by Ala Mhigan scouts several times en route, but the Green Commander Osborne forced the Gridanian host to march on for several days without rest in an attempt to break through. Eventually, upon a hill in Tunalka, Osbin found himself surrounded, fatigued and outnumbered by an enemy force 6,000 strong. And after 3 desperate attempts to break through, the Gridanians were whittled down and decimated in what came to be known as the First Battle of Tunalka. Osbin was captured, along with the Seedseer's legendary staff Claustrum, which was being wielded by the Gridanian command in defense of the Twelveswood. The handful of survivors were forced to flee as their Ala Mhigan guests secured the East Shroud. The Gridanians fell back to 5 hangs, and had no choice but to dig in for a desperate defensive war. Certain of his victory, Gilbard urged Gridania to accept a conditional surrender of the eastern swathes of the Central Shroud, and to relinquish the Seedseers to the custody of Ala Mhigo. Gilbard was celebrated back at home as a war hero, and his victory at Tunalka served to precipitate the rise of his patron order, the Fist of Rhalgr, to political power, prestige, and favor with the royal house. These early decisive victories against Gridania represented perhaps the highest point for Ala Mhigo. After so long fighting to protect the realm from foreign invaders without a shred of compensation from their neighbors, the Ala Mhigans were claiming their due. But King Manfred's ambition was a double-edged sword, and as we will see in the next part, the rest of Eorzea was not so receptive to change. The Autumn War had only just begun.